are live. Well, happy Wednesday afternoon, Mesa Public Schools. I'm Andy Forlis, the very proud superintendent of Mesa Public Schools. And thank you so much for joining us on Facebook Live. This is our weekly event. And I want to introduce, for many of you, these are familiar faces, that we have our Associate Superintendent, Mrs. Holly Williams, joining us this evening. Mrs. Williams runs our coronavirus team and works with our coronavirus tracking, has amazing relationships with our leadership teams at all of our schools, and is tracking all of our data and making great sense of it. And we also have Nadine Miller. She is our Director of Health Services. So she leads all of our work with our nurses, our health assistants, and has tight communication both to the Maricopa County Health Department and the Arizona Department of Health. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Nadine, as well. I'm going to start. This is going to be a little bit of a different format for Facebook Live this afternoon. I've got a bit of a presentation. It's a few slides that I want to share with you, because I also want to let everybody know that we are going to be sharing a recording of this Facebook Live event with all of our staff and with all of our community by this evening. So we've got a communication that I have written that is coming out, and there's a space for that Facebook Live link so that you can be able to share widely. And we want to make sure that everybody has access to it, not only in English, but we also have this going on in Spanish in our Facebook in Espanol, and all of our communications come out in Spanish as well. So I am going to start by sharing my screen. And I'm just going to make sure that Cody, who's running all of our technology, Cody, can you let me know, are you able to see the screen? Is it projecting to Facebook?
Yes, it's working.
Very excellent. All right. So we have had many conversations about the decision-making that goes into determining what the learning models look like in Mesa Public Schools. So I'm going to talk through some of the history, where we currently are, and give a preview into what we're doing to end this first semester. We've got 2 more days left till December 18th, and then what we are doing to begin our second semester, those first 2 weeks of remote learning, and the returning to in-person learning on January 19th. So these slides will be helpful because I know that I can talk really fast, and sometimes it's great to be able to have the written word to guide us. So you'll see that I've titled this slide, Moving the Goalposts. In some of our Facebook Live chats, in some of our social media, there has been this conversation that says, I really wish that Mesa Public Schools would keep using the metrics, or why did they stop using the metrics, or why did they change the goalposts? So I want to take that head on today. And so that is the purpose of this presentation. So let me walk you through, and I think we can see the little Hollywood squares here of pictures, so I'm going to move those. So let me walk you through some of the history of how the evolution of metrics in making decisions about learning models in Mesa Public Schools. So on August 19th, our governing board passed what we call that COVID-19 resolution. And that resolution made a commitment that we would use Arizona Department of Health Services and or Maricopa County Department of Public Health metrics to transition from our remote learning model into in-person. That was done, that the governing board gave me as the superintendent the decision-making power to do that. And that was to honor the metrics that we had at the time on August 19th. So from there, September 14th, we opened up to 2 days of modified in-person learning. And the criteria was that we needed to see a decline in less than 100 cases per 100,000, less than 7% positivity rate, and less than 10% of COVID-like illnesses. On September 22nd, I made a recommendation to our governing board to move from 2 days of in-person learning to 5 days of in-person learning if we were lower than 6% positivity rate. And it was important to know that the other 2 metrics were in that moderate or yellow category. And I'm going to say this multiple times in our time today. That was the data that we had. We had Maricopa County data, we had Arizona Department of Health data. We opened up to 5 days of in-person learning. And remember, that's only for the families that chose that. We still had the choice, families still had a choice to keep their kids in remote learning. So on October 12th, we opened up to 5 days of modified in-person learning based on those public health metrics. But we also made the commitment that we would launch a Mesa Public Schools COVID-19 dashboard. And in that dashboard, we pay attention and we record every positive case for students and for staff in every one of our schools and our programs. And then we have a category for district departments. So up until October 12th, we did not have any data specific to how COVID was showing up in our schools and how it was behaving. So that's the history that got us to 5 days of modified in-person learning. So then this question comes up that says, well, now wait a second, did Mesa Public Schools move the goalposts? Well, my response to that has been, we have more data and now we have more goalposts. So let me walk you through this. When we opened up to in-person learning, we used county and state data because that school level data was not available. We had no idea what the positivity rates were until we started tracking them on the dashboard. So then we opened up, we committed to changing our learning model school by school. And many of you will remember, up until September 14th, when we were still in remote learning, we said, we are going to open up as a unified district. And then that next question was, well, what will determine if we close? And that answer was, we will work with the health departments to understand what the virus is looking like in a school, and then schools will close school by school. And I think it's important that we clarify the word close. We don't close schools. We move them to remote learning. We change that learning model. So we have 5 days of modified in-person as a learning model, 2 days modified in-person, and remote learning. Those are 3 learning models, but we have never closed a school. What we have done is shifted from in-person learning to remote learning, and we've made that commitment very early on, opening up as a district, and then we would change learning models school by school. And that was announced in August and also in September and into October. So let me tell you some of the things that we've learned. So more data, more goalposts. We are kicking the ball through multiple goalposts every single day, because every time that we have a positive COVID case, that triggers a series of conversations with our coronavirus tracking team, both inside of Mesa Public Schools and through the county health department. And this is what we have learned. COVID-19 does not show up in schools in the same way each time. Sometimes it affects adults more prevalently, sometimes it's children. Sometimes it is in one classroom, sometimes it is scattered throughout the school. So those conversations are critical for us to make the most accurate decision about how kids can and how kids can most safely learn, and how staff can most safely teach and run the operations of the school. We also know that COVID-19 does not behave the same in every school, in every program, in every classroom. Where we are seeing and have seen trends at our high schools that COVID might be happening within a sports team, but that doesn't mean that it's showing up throughout the school. We also know that the alignment of the COVID-19 data by zip code and by school varies. If there is a high positivity rate in a particular zip code, that doesn't mean that every school in that zip code has a high positivity rate. So again, there is so much conversation and so much more data that we have to be asking very sophisticated questions. And we also know that there is a story behind every single COVID-19 case. And looking at a zip code or looking at a public health metric to say that we have a substantial spread or moderate spread or minimal spread, that is one piece of data, but we have to have individual conversations, because this is about human interaction, and this is about the stories that behind the COVID-19 data. So we have inside of our district, we have our nurses, our health assistants, we have a district level team that are having conversations with schools. And again, the county health department has contact tracers at individual schools. Mrs. Williams, our associate superintendent, watches those trends alongside Nadine Miller, our director of health services. And when we start to see a trend at a school of cases that we're seeing, a trend that positive cases are coming in, whether they're with adults or with students or both, that triggers a conversation. Mrs. Williams then calls the school and has a conversation with the principal and the leadership team and asks more questions and gets more information and engages that leadership team so that we can make the very best decision. So when I say that there is more data, that more data has created more goalposts for us because we are trying to make sure that we are paying very good attention, very intent attention to the different pieces of data that help us to make decisions. So let's talk about our Safe, Strong, Ready plan for 2021. January 4th to the 15th, students are going to participate in remote learning. During that time, staff and students are going to continue to report those positive cases that are occurring. They will report those back to their school, and the county will also be telling us about the cases that come their direction. That allows us to rebuild our dashboard because remember, during winter break, we will not have any reporting going on. Our staff is these amazing teams that I'm talking to you about will also be enjoying a well-deserved winter break. And so we will not have any data collection during that time. We need the 2 weeks of January 4th to the 15th to collect very relevant data so that we can rebuild the dashboard. On January 14th, all families will receive a communication from me as well as from their school that will identify which learning model their school will be in. Because when we make decisions about the learning model, we make it by school. I do not believe that, well, let me say this a little bit differently. We have schools that have had 0 cases. We have schools that have had 1 or 2 cases of COVID on their campus. So it's really important that we pay attention classroom by classroom, school by school, looking at all of the metrics, the county metrics, the state metrics, as well as what's showing up in our school and in our classrooms. That will determine the learning model that children they will return to on January 19th. So we are maintaining that commitment that we are looking school by school, classroom by classroom. It is our goal that on January 19th, that all of our schools return to 5 days of modified in-person learning. But we know and we are prepared that if that is not the best learning model for every one of our schools because of how COVID is showing up over those 2 weeks, we will then choose a different learning model. We will select a different learning model for them. You will also see on our dashboard, beginning on the 14th, that there will be an indicator on the dashboard of which learning model each of our schools is in, because I think that's also important. Oftentimes families or teachers, their relationship is with a specific school. They know what's happening in their school, but they may not know what's happening in the 84 other schools in our district. So it's important that we communicate that. Up until this date, we have had one of our high schools in 2 days of modified in-person learning while the rest were in 5. We have had one of our elementaries in a 2-week quarantine in remote learning because of positivity rates that happened among adults at that school. We could not properly staff the school. We will be announcing today that we will have another high school that for the remainder of this week, they will go into remote learning based on the number of cases that they have. So again, we are demonstrating our commitment to the metrics, but we're also demonstrating our sophisticated analysis of the metrics to make the decision that is closest to the classroom and to the school. Whoops. So this gets me back to where we started. I have gone through the whole presentation with you, which is, again, just to make sure that we have some grounded language and so that this is recorded that everybody can see this. So the beauty of Facebook Live is that you are not listening to a PowerPoint presentation, that we are answering your questions. So I am going to exit the presentation and get back into our Facebook Live and start answering some questions. So I'm going to pose this one to Mrs. Williams. Can we keep high schools remote and keep elementary schools open? Is a question that's coming to us through our Facebook feed.
We can do many things. I would agree that our younger learners struggle more in the remote environment because they are more unfamiliar with technology. It's more of a struggle. But I will say we believe that all students benefit from being in person in front of a teacher to the greatest extent possible. So we'll be committed to watching the metrics and making sure that we're keeping students as safe as we can. And if remote's the right choice for one of our high schools, then that's what we'll do to make sure that we have that we control the case count. But to make a blanket statement that all high schools should be remote goes against our philosophy that students belong with their teachers in person as often as they can, as long as we're safe. So I would say, yes, high school students have a little easier to be remote, but that would not be our first choice if we have an option.
Thank you. There's another question, and I use the word, moving the goalpost. So this is taking it a little bit, a little different twist on that question. And so I think that Mrs. Williams and Mrs. Miller, if you'd like to answer this question, is it true that Mesa is not following CDC guidelines?
You want me to take that one, Holly?
Sure.
No, it is not true that we're not following the guidelines. Guidelines are put out by guidelines, like we often put out guidelines for other things. The CDC puts out guidelines, and then the state adopts the guidelines that work for the state and the ones that they want. And then each county takes it from there and divides it a little bit more and makes guidelines for things that are a little bit more specific to their community. So like Maricopa obviously has a different kind of clientele and a kind of structure than maybe Yavapai that is more rural. And so they try to make them then work for those communities and try to set them up. The guidelines oftentimes are very broad and very big, saying that maybe a school should quarantine or a classroom should quarantine. The problem is that they don't see the data that we collect. So they're making that off of a very broad spectrum of all schools have this, but all schools don't have what Mesa has. Mesa's done an amazing job doing some of the things that they have done and really working down to the nitty gritty to keep as many kids as we can in school with keeping the safety and parents informed so that they can make decisions based on their kids and their health issues of their family and make good decisions. So we are following the guidelines. We are actually probably more in line with what the CDC does because of the great work that Holly has done trying to keep those guidelines very specific to those schools, to those classrooms, to keep as many kids as possible in school.
So I think I'd like to thank you so much, Mrs. Miller, and let's add to that. In fact, the CDC came out with a change in quarantine. So maybe this is a good time to talk about that change in quarantine and that we are following those CDC guidelines of what that looks like. So whoever wants to grab on.
I'm giving that one to you too, Nadine, because you know that one way better.
Last week we got hit up, really close up on Thursday. That said, all of a sudden the guidelines were changing from the CDC, and I think the county actually and the state didn't know they were coming that quickly. And so they weren't quite ready to go, and they told us they would be up and running by Monday. So on Monday, we got the guidance from the county on what their verbiage was and what their recommendation was, which was a nice change for us because it combined isolation for that person that is ill to isolate for the 10 days and quarantine to 10 days too, because it was 14 days and people were confused. So the kid that's sick gets to go back in 10 days. The kid that's the brother gets to come back in 14 days. People were very confused. So it's now 10 days of isolation for the student that's sick and 10 days of isolation for anybody that we quarantine in the household. So I think that's going to help to make it a little bit clearer for families, and they'll know what day kids can return to school and what to do, and for our staffs too.
And I would add to what Mrs. Miller said. So she laid out that rapid timeline. CDC made the announcement last week. The county turned it around and got it to us this week, and we in turn put it in place on Tuesday. So, I mean, we turned it around that quickly also, because it's important that we are following as closely as we can the guidance we get from the folks who know this stuff best.
And that's an example of more data, more goalposts, right? So
exactly.
We are getting more data all the time. It would be crazy for us to think that the decisions that we were making in August would still be holding true today in December. We have learned so much and been provided so much information, and we are getting better and we are becoming better consumers of the information that comes to us so that we can make the most relevant and appropriate decisions. So we have another question, and this might be a good one for you, Mrs. Williams, because I know that you have a lot of conversations with this particular school. Why is Mountain View still open?
Mountain View is still open because we're seeing we see a consistent, steady number of cases for a large high school. We don't see a spike in cases where we see that it's all happening in this one area or this one class. We just see a typical number. I hate to say typical because in a pandemic we don't know, right? But what I would consider a pretty steady number. We're not seeing big waves of high and low at Mountain View. And when we did, we saw it in one particular program early on in October, November, and we isolated and quarantined that program to try and stop it. But we don't see evidence, and I'm going to use words that Nadine would use. We don't see evidence of spread in the school. We're seeing the community spread effects coming into our schools. So, and so if we were seeing the spread in the school where, multiple kids in one classroom or multiple kids in one program, then we would look at Mountain View differently. But for right now, what we're seeing is that community spread coming in as opposed to the spread happening here and going out. And so that's why Mountain View remains open right now.
And I just want to give a concrete example that today, Mrs. Williams worked with 3 different schools and has quarantined 3 separate classrooms based on specific data. And they will be remote till the end of the week. They would be remote for 14 days, but because of the winter break, it's for just these 2 days.
10 days.
So that's
10 days.
Oh yeah, that's right. 10 days. You're absolutely right. They moved my goalpost. Okay, this one is going to take some time to get into, but I think it's really, really, really important for us to spend some time on this question. Help me understand how your data can be accurate when we keep hearing that people aren't getting tested, so they're not positive.
That's great. I'll start with it and I'll throw it to Nadine because we have 2 pieces to this. So I agree that there are folks who don't get tested. And let me give you an example of where that might happen. I have a family and there are 5 of us in the family. And we all have the same symptoms and 2 of us have tested positive. Well, I might not test the other 3, but I'm responsible and I'm going to keep the other 3 home for 10 days. So the way we're tracking that is through our quarantine codes. And the families are for the most part, are doing a really good job with letting us know, hey, mom's sick, I'm keeping the kids home for 10 days. Or, hey, my youngest has the sniffles and can't smell, and I know what this is because we've had it in the house, so I'm going to keep them home for 10 days. So I say that to share with you, that's part of our decision making. So Nadine, do you want to talk about how we use that information that we gather through and who's gathering it for us? Because those conversations are happening at the school level.
Correct. A lot of that's coming in obviously through either the registrars or through the health offices as parents are reporting those. And we know not everybody necessarily has chosen to go get tested and bring that information. The thing that I think is important though is because of the testing pieces of it, when kids are positive or when our staff are positive, they also get a certain amount of immunity. So kids that have COVID, say this week, they get 90 days of immunity. So every time they come into our health office, if we have that documentation, we can say they've tested positive for 90 days. I don't have to send that kid home every time that kid has a little sniffle or a cough because we know it's not COVID. So then we have to look at all the other ways we used to do communicable disease, that if they are really sick, running fever, have multiple other issues, then yes, they have to go home and still be at home until they're well enough to come back to school so they're not spreading whatever other viruses or flu or whatever else it might be. But it is important that parents, that they probably should go test those kids to be positive of what that is. That also allows kids to be in school. So, the nice thing will be that we might make it to spring break with some of these kiddos that are going to have a runny nose and because of allergies and colds and things like that, that we're actually be able to keep in school a lot longer if we just have that testing information.
Yeah, we would encourage everybody to test, but we understand that families don't. So my point in sharing the example was, while we prefer you to get tested because that gives us the best information, we understand that in a family you might not. So as long as you're making the decision to keep your student home for the 10 days, because that's what we know to be safer, that helps us keep our schools open for the other students and helps keep kids safe.
And so, as I mentioned, that Mrs. Williams has a conversation with the building principal, or if it was at a district department or a program, she has a conversation with that leader. And part of the conversation is how many, she analyzes and goes over the data. How many kids are out on Q codes? How many adults are out on Q codes? And so that is part of it. You don't see it in our dashboard, but you do, but it is part of the decision-making process, and it's part of the data that it's critical when we make our decisions. There was another question, is why aren't we using a 2-day model?
We do use a 2-day model. Currently, we're using it at Mesa High. So there are options. There are good and bad options about the 2-day model. So when it works, it's good for the circumstances when we feel like there are a lot of cases on campus among the students and that our classrooms are very full. So if we had a class, students where most families have chosen to come back in 5 days and most of them didn't stay remote, and they're a little tighter fit in our classrooms, then a 2-day model makes perfect sense, because we would have fewer kids on campus at a time, and that would give us an opportunity to space them out better and to have fewer interactions and keep a cohort group together. Where it doesn't work is a school that already has a significant number of families who've chosen to be remote. We have some of our elementaries who have as many as 50% or more families who've remained in the remote setting. So we're already down to half the class. So picture a classroom of 11. If I put them on an A-B schedule, now we have 5 kids per day. We're able to space pretty safely with 11 in a classroom. So it just, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So we have it as one of our options. We just, we make a decision, as I said earlier, school by school, classroom by classroom. And sometimes it's not the best fit to do an A-B depending on the circumstances.
Okay, here's one that's coming in about letters and notification. This one says, both of my kids are remote. Why do I get letters from my elementary, but not from my junior high? The district should be consistent.
We leave those decisions about the sending the letters to the parents, to the remote, for the principals to the remote families, and some choose to do it and some not. But that's good feedback, and I will share that with the principals that they would like that to be consistent. So I appreciate that feedback.
Thank you. Here's another, this is kind of a two-part. I think I'm going to go back to something that was shared in a different Facebook Live comment that said, oh, isn't it interesting? Dr. Forlis and Mrs. Williams are both in 2 separate rooms, but they're advocating for and supporting 5 days of in-person instruction. When we do Facebook Live, if you've done this before, in order for the sound to work, we need to be in separate rooms, but we are all working in our offices and our buildings and so on. So wanted to make sure that that was clear. This one says, why are district office staff allowed to work remotely?
We have in place a telework policy that we put in place. We actually began it last year, began writing it, and before the pandemic even hit, we were talking about how do we make sure that we are nimble with technology and allow folks whose jobs can be accomplished from home to be able to work from home. So we have a telework policy. Some of our district staff is using that telework policy because the function of their job is able to be completed from home. And there are certain departments, and I'm going to use payroll as an example. None of us would want payroll to go down because if there are not very many of them, and if COVID should go through there and those folks would not be able to work, it would mean disaster for our system. It would mean folks would go without pay and things like that. So we have a policy where we're asking our supervisors to phase folks in that makes sense to be in the building and allow those to work at home in a safe way so that we can keep the vital functions of the district happening. I'll tell you, most folks are back, but there are certain departments where we're really cautious about making sure that we keep folks safe so that the function of the district can continue, so that we don't cause an outbreak in an area that would cause folks to not be able to keep the lights on and the doors open and the bills being paid.
Thank you so much for that. And I know we're at 4:30, but there's a lot of questions coming in. So Nadine, if you wouldn't mind explaining further the 90-day immunity. I think that was great information that came out, and I think some people are processing it and say, wait a minute, tell me more about that. So if you can tell us more about the 90-day immunity, that would be really helpful.
Sure. We had the county and the CDC say that once you have COVID, they feel like you build immunity, just like you would say you had chickenpox or you had measles or one of those other diseases that you build immunity in your system because your body can fight that off. So right now, and like you said earlier, testing and what we know from COVID from March to what we know from COVID in December has changed a lot. So they haven't say that they think that if you had COVID, you have at least a 90-day immunity, which means you can't get COVID probably again in that time period. Now, there are probably exceptions, but the majority of people build immunity and can't get COVID again for that 90-day. After that, they're not sure. So once that 90-day time is up, they'd have to be tested again if they get the symptoms of COVID. But in that time period, we could have kids or staff that maybe have the other typical things that happen in the spring and the fall and the winter with the colds and the viruses and the allergies and all those things that right now we're having to send those kids home because we can't tell the difference between COVID symptoms and allergy symptoms and cold symptoms and, all the other things that kids get. So we have to send those kids home. So this would allow us to put on their information that they have immunity. Now, the problem is we have to be sure that we have a positive result. And so that's why it's so important that parents bring that information, either, a hard copy of it, a snapshot of their phone if they get that, the phone message that has the pertinent information, but it has to have, the person's name, their date of birth, what type of test it was, and what the results was. And then we can put that on their information, and hopefully we can keep kids in school. Our nurses will be able to query that information, be able to know who is immune and how long they're immune. Now, we did add almost everybody we had from the beginning because we also know that sometimes that data changes too. So we're hoping that maybe you build more than 90 days of immunity and maybe you build 120 days of immunity so we can have those kids on there. So we did put all the data that we had on the computer so that we could access any of it if that data changes. So that's how we're hoping to keep kids in school a little longer.
Excellent. There was another question about vaccinations and will they be mandatory? I want to make sure that our viewing audience today knows that our general counsel, Casey Gregson, is working with other school lawyers across the state of Arizona and throughout the United States, taking a look at what this looks like. There are no decisions about mandatory vaccinations for COVID. We have no plans for that, but what I can tell you is that when we return in January, we're excited to say that we have been chosen to be part of a pilot with Arizona State University and the Arizona Department of Health Services, that we will be able to provide COVID testing at our school sites. And again, Mrs. Williams and Mrs. Miller are on that team working on what those implementation plans look like. I am watching the clock, but can you provide a high-level overview of what our families and our staff can expect when we come back in January?
Yes, we have been, as you said, we've been selected for this pilot, and we're excited to partner with ASU and Maricopa County Department of Health and Arizona Health Services to provide access to COVID testing in our schools. We believe that the ASU will be regional sites. They're saliva-based testing that we've heard so much about in the news and tends to be a quicker turnaround on results. So we're excited about that, to have access for that. What we think we'll have, what we know, what they tell us we'll have, we haven't seen it yet, will be front of the line access, basically. So they open up a certain number of spots every day to the public. We will have a certain number reserved for Mesa Public Schools before the public has access. So we will have a certain number of spots for testing every day that we can use for certain groups of folks. So say we have an outbreak at a school. So we were asked about Mountain View earlier. We would be able to say, our team would be able to say, okay, Mountain View, today's your testing day. If you'd like to be tested for COVID, let's go there and let's see what the real story is at Mountain View. And we have opportunities like that. So that's exciting. And then we believe we're going to have access to rapid testing. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, if we'll have that at every site or if that will be regional yet, because we know it comes with a level of training that folks have to have. So as we learn more about what the training will be and what folks need to have and the reporting responsibilities, we will roll that out. But what we believe we will have is the antigen testing, which is really good for adults who are showing symptoms And so if somebody wakes up in the morning, a teacher who's, I just don't feel very well, I'm not sure if this is COVID or if this is allergies, as Nadine said, lots of stuff still goes around. They'll have access to a rapid test in one of our locations. So we're not sure where yet, but we are excited about the possibility of having it widely available in our community. Nadine, did I forget anything there?
No, but we also have access to MCC with Danbury there, and they're doing testing, so that's in our community, as well as the Banner Urgent Cares through ADHS has a commitment to the schools that if they take the flyer from the schools, they will test them for at no cost for the PCR testing too. So we do have quite a few options right now, and hopefully with ASU and the ADHS county piece that we will have some more options to come along in January. We just are. I think ASU might have gone on break, so I think we're kind of holding the hunt on until they get back a little bit.
Well, I just appreciate that. So, and I think the other thing that we can, I'd like to share a commitment to our community that when we come back in January, our health and safety design team has been meeting these last couple of weeks. They've been reviewing what our mitigation strategies were that we started in August and then that we rolled out and when we opened up our buildings in September, and have said, okay, what's gone really well and what needs to be tightened up. And so we are going to come out when we welcome our children back into school on January 19th with a renewed effort and around mitigation strategies, most importantly, wearing a mask up and over the nose, and that fancy language that said it needs to fit snugly against the face. So we are going to have additional signage that the county is coming out with some new marketing material. And then when it's time for the vaccine, we will be working with the city of Mesa, and we will be doing much communication around access to the vaccinations. And we know that healthcare workers are in that phase 1A category, and that includes our school nurses, which we're really, really happy about. And then 1B is our frontline educators. So those are our both classified, certified, and administrative staff that are working directly with children and with the public. So we have advocated to get to that front of the line, and we are going to make sure that it is well communicated when it is time. So I want to say thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. I know that every day you provide a tremendous amount of confidence to me about the work that you do and the leadership that you bring to this district and to this community. So I want to say thank you. And I'm very hopeful that those who are tuning in today and that as we share this video widely, know that we have talent and we have leadership that is committed to making the right decisions for our children and our staff. So thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, and we will get this video out in a community message this evening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.